Welcome to today's T-Money webinar. We're going to begin in about a minute. Okay, great. So good afternoon. I am Marguerite Versace, VP of T-Money, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar. The session is titled A Data-Driven Approach to Accurate Cash Forecasting. It has been approved for 1.2 CTP and 1.2 FPAC credits. You can easily download the CTP FPAC confirmation of attendance letter on the attendee hub or on the event website. The presentation can also be found at the bottom of the session description on the attendee hub. Please don't forget to join the chat function on the right side screen of the attendee hub. There's also a survey link on the attendee hub. Please take the time to fill this out either during today's session or afterwards. You'll receive an email. Your feedback is very important to us. The T-Money board is very excited to provide you great content through the CVent attendee hub sponsored by TIS. All attendees have no video and are on audio mute. You can ask questions using the Q&A feature to the right side of your screen. We also have much information to provide, so the questions will be read at the end of the session as time permits, and all questions are welcomed. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for this session. Speaking with us today is John Paquette, VP Solutions TIS. Kathy Fields, Assistant Treasurer and Senior Director, Global Risk Management, Hitachi Vantara. We also have Nicolas Christiaen, CEO, Cashforce, a TIS company. Now I would like to turn it over to John. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Marguerite. Thanks everybody for joining our session here today. As mentioned, I'm John Paquette. I'm VP Solutions for TIS's US market, and I'm one of the three speakers that are going to be taking you through the presentation here today. So from that standpoint, maybe we just take a few moments here to introduce ourselves so you can get familiar with the speakers. So first of all, in my role, I oversee the solutions team as well as the customer onboarding team for TIS. TIS is a specialized provider in the payments, bank connectivity, and cash management space. Really, before joining TIS, though, all of my experience was on the practitioner side, working in various finance and treasury roles for US-based organizations. So very familiar with this cash forecasting topic, something I dealt a lot with on a day-to-day basis in my practitioner life, and something that we help our customers a lot with too in solving in the software provider space. So very happy to be here. We also have Kathy Fields, and Kathy, maybe you could take a moment here to introduce yourself as well.
Sure, thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Fields. I'm the Assistant Treasurer and Senior Director of Global Risk Management for Hitachi Vantara. That's just a very long-winded way of saying I'm responsible for everything cash and insurance for the company globally. So yeah, I've been in Treasury for, I hate to say it, over 30 odd years, and the cash forecasting has been forefront on just about every conversation I've had at every conference I've had over the last 30 years. So very happy to be here to kind of share some of my journey on this particular topic with you.
All right, thanks, Kathy. And then finally, we have Nicolas Christiaen, who's the founder of Cashforce. So Nicolas, welcome, and maybe you could give us a sense of your background as well.
Thanks a lot, John, and great to see us here on the panel today. So indeed, my background actually sits in private equity portfolio-based companies, where I was advising CFOs as well as treasurers to get a better grip on their cash flow forecast and to optimize working capital. So in that role, I was confronted with the different challenges during those processes, and actually that gave me the idea actually to found the company called Cashforce. Cashforce then founded 8 years ago, and then being acquired quite recently in June of this year by TIS. And I think the interesting fact is that cash forecasting, cash management is very close to the business that TIS is performing as well. So it was a great way to sort of join forces and to make it a bigger scope for treasurers in the world.
Thanks, Nicola. All right, and as we move into the content here, we just have one slide just to give everybody a sense of what the conversation is going to look like here today. So first of all, I'll take the first few slides, really just teeing up this topic conceptually, right? What are the historical challenges with cash flow forecasting? Why has this kind of classically been such a hard thing for organizations to really, get a handle on, right? And then we're going to dig into some of the root causes for some of the, call it dissatisfaction in the cash forecasting space, or maybe just generally, some of the things that could be improved upon to sort of build a better forecasting process. We're going to focus obviously very heavily on the importance of complete data. The concept of this webinar is really just around, data-driven approach to cash forecasting. So that will be a key theme that we bring in throughout the conversation. And then talk a little bit about how technology can support that data-driven approach to cash forecasting. Really about halfway through this topic, I'll hand to Nicolas, who will bring in a lot more of the practical applications that he's seen from the Cashforce side in terms of how people have addressed this topic well, right? So what are people doing out there in the market to really achieve a data-driven approach to cash forecasting? He'll also bring in a lot of the concepts around, what are you forecasting? Really being able to identify the cash flows that you want to forecast, the corresponding data sources, and how to get that ingrained into your tool, right? And then the approaches to doing this. So there's not a one-size-fits-all necessarily approach to data-driven cash forecasting. It really depends a lot on your organization, where you're coming from, what you're looking to achieve. So from that standpoint, he's going to give a few different situations for how you might be able to approach this topic. And then, towards the end of the presentation, last 20 minutes or so, we'll hand to Kathy, who's going to actually take us through the Hitachi Vantara case study and some of the things that she's done to improve cash forecasting at her organization. So a lot to cover. We will reserve some time at the end here for a Q&A as well. So feel free to drop questions into the question box. We're happy to sort of pick those up. And I think we'll have enough time to address, most, if not all those questions. Always happy to connect offline as well if there's anything that we don't get to. But as mentioned, I'll start here with just sort of describing some of the quintessential challenges of cash forecasting. And I think you can trace it back to, Treasury as a whole, which is, I think, a function that's undergone a tremendous amount of, development professionally and just in terms of what the function has been responsible for historically. I mean, I know back in my early days of Treasury, it was very transactional. So there was a lot of, payment volumes. You're kind of thought of as the wire room. It then progressed into the cash management team, which you're more responsible for the day-to-day cash management of the function. And then finally, the treasury management function, which is a broad umbrella term that can really mean a whole lot of different things. Everything from, quintessential cash forecasting topics to capital markets topics, right? So there's a lot there. And I think, despite how much the role has grown over time, one thing hasn't changed, and that's that Treasury departments always have small teams, right? It's always 2 to 4 people, it seems like, at every organization that we've talked to, who are tasked with kind of handling all these different aspects of the treasury management functionality, right? So, and despite the fact that they've gained new functions within Treasury, the old ones haven't necessarily dropped off either, right? So you still have these high volume, somewhat repetitive by nature operational tasks that Treasury teams are tasked with: reconciliations, payments, monitoring transactions and things like that. A lot of human reliant processes as well, right? A lot of manual processes and things. And from that lens, I think a lot of the technology that's been put out there in the market is aimed at addressing exactly this. How do you deal with the volume of work with a small team? And so they've been sort of driven towards process automation and operational efficiency. So we have a lot of technology that's been launched out to the market that handles things like reconciliation, automated GL postings, dealing with FX deal management, interest rate, hedging type aspects as well. Payments, of course, right? Intercompany activity, all these different tasks, as well as cash forecasting, which is going to be the one we talk about in a lot of detail here today, right? So a lot of organizations have purchased these solutions. And I think what they find when they go to implement them is that despite how good the functionality might be within the solutions itself, it's essentially no good without the integrations and the data to fuel those functions. So you put a TMS or some sort of treasury application in place, you still need bank data coming in an automated way. You still need a back and forth integration to, say, an ERP system or a market rates provider or a trading platform, or all these different data integrations, right? Which really becomes the project within the project for most Treasury teams. The IT project that supports the TMS or Treasury operational efficiency project, right? And I think a lot of organizations reach a point during that project where they say, okay, we have 60, 70% of our banks connected here. We have our main ERP connected. I think that's enough, right? And so they have sort of so-called partial implementations that might be fine for certain processes. So if you think about, GL reconciliation, for example, if you're automating 60 to 70% of your GL reconciliation, even if you don't have it 100% automated, that's still pretty good. That's a lot of, repetitive work that's been automated. That's a lot of efficiency gained within the department itself. But looking at that primarily from the cash forecasting standpoint, if you've automated the process of collecting and synthesizing 60 to 70% of your cash forecasting data, that just means you have to go somewhere else to get the other 30, 40%, right? Because you can't forecast without the 100% complete picture. So it doesn't translate particularly well to that particular aspect. And this is where I think you can trace a lot of the root cause of some of the dissatisfaction in the cash forecasting space and really become sort of the lens to look at it for how you improve it going forward. And, we talk about these as being historical challenges, but they still persist to today, really. So, there's a few stats here on the screen, maybe starting with the bottom left-hand corner. This was a survey that Strategic Treasurer launched in 2021, just asking people the very basic question, how challenging is it for you to create a cash forecast? And if you look to the right-hand side of this in blue, right, less than 25% are indicating that it's even somewhat easy to create a cash forecast within their business. By comparison, nearly 50% is saying it's difficult to create a cash forecast within their business, right? Moving over to the next survey result here, this one is really comparing satisfaction in cash flow forecasting in comparison if you're using an ERP or TMS, some sort of automated software to do this, versus Excel, right? And you can see that those that are satisfied with their processes are basically equal between those that have purchased a software to do this and those that are using Excel, which is kind of crazy if you think about, the amount of investment that goes into, getting a system up and running. If you expand that out a little bit to those that are somewhat satisfied with their process, you have close to 60% that are using some sort of automated solution like an ERP and TMS. But I think that's a clear signal, definitely from the software provider standpoint, that this problem is definitely not solved, right? It's not, there's no kind of key silver bullet out there to address cash flow forecasting. And then maybe the last survey result to draw your attention to is the one in the upper right-hand corner, which says obstructions to accelerating cycle time to complete a forecast. So these are really the aspects that are really hindering organizations from creating their forecast quickly. And you can see top two are data related, right? Data gathering, 73% say that that's the biggest issue in creating their forecast, data preparation. And then you get down to things like calculations and, actually creating the report. That's not all that complicated, but getting the data in there in the right format, that really is what's complicated, right? So, and I think it sort of flips the whole topic on its head a little bit in terms of not necessarily thinking about things from an operational efficiency standpoint. With forecasting, it's not necessarily about how quickly I can create that forecast, which you should be able to create a forecast quickly if implemented well, but it's also about being able to actually derive insights from that forecast when you do, right? And you need complete data in order to do that. So only makes sense to sort of think of this from a data first standpoint. So this is kind of the theme of our webinar, obviously, here as well. Definitely easier said than done, though. And this is definitely a lot of what we want to walk you through during the course of the webinar. If you look at the bottom graph here, there are a lot of data sources that go into creating a complete forecast. There's AP data, AR data, accounting data, treasury payments, treasury cash flow related data, payroll, FP&A data, if you're projecting out past a certain time frame, right? So there's a lot of different data sets that go in there. And, ultimately how you get those all into a solution is not necessarily a one size fits all aspect. I think that this particular graphic calls attention to what people would think of these days as the ideal end state, which is this sort of harmonious system that's automatically synchronizing information from all these different data sources, pulling it into the forecast, right? And then maybe even, bank APIs, pulling in balances and allowing you to do things in real time, right? This is kind of maybe the marketing picture of what cash forecasting looks like today, and totally achievable, right? But depending on where you are today, if you're doing a basic Excel-based forecast based on averages, going to this is going to be a huge leap, right? And maybe not all that practical, and maybe you're setting yourself up for failure. So that's why we want to bring into this conversation, I think, so much the different approaches for how to get there and how to really tailor those approaches to your organization's objectives for how you want to improve your cash forecast, right? Not necessarily moving to somebody else's vision of what an ideal state is. But I think regardless of how those different approaches work, the one thing that always remains consistent is that you need complete data, regardless of how you're sort of building your forecast, whether it's a simple upload process or a complex API process. You need complete data, and that's really what organizations should focus on in order to create a forecast that's really going to help you improve your business, manage cash flow, derive insights, all those good topics, right? So And Nicolas is going to get into that a lot more, and definitely going to hand to him in a moment here. But maybe just one more slide here to kind of bring some context to it. Another survey result. I love data points here. So, and this one is really a survey that we launched at the beginning of 2021 in combination with one of our survey partners. That's asking people, what's your desired impact of technology in 2022? If you're investing, what are you trying to gain in terms of actual business improvements? It's kind of interesting if you look at enterprise level organizations, which are represented by the teal color on the bar graph. Their most common response is the middle one here. They want to gain better visibility into data to drive decision making, right? So that kind of ties in nicely with that topic I mentioned before, complete data for the purpose of gaining business insights. And then if you look at small to mid-market organizations, they're thinking of things more in the terms of, I want to improve my systems in my department. I want to automate manual repetitive processes, right? This kind of brings it back to the first slide, the sort of looking at this from the lens of process improvement. So I think it's interesting because I think just by nature of how organizations have invested in technology over time, maybe enterprise level organizations are further along on the technology curve. They've probably implemented earlier, gone through some of the challenges that I mentioned previously, right? And then already looking at things very much from a data standpoint and getting insights into the data. And then maybe other organizations that are lower on that technology curve, small organizations that might not have had budgets to invest in treasury technology, are still thinking about process automation, right? They're still thinking about, hey, how do I do more with less in terms of resources internally? But another aspect we want to bring into this conversation is it doesn't have to be that way. The small organizations don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past. There is an approach that really fits all to kind of put together a data-driven approach to cash flow forecasting. So with that, hopefully that conceptually tees up the topic for you guys well. And I, at this point, want to hand to Nicolas to bring in some of the practical applications behind this.
All right. No, thank you, John. And by the way, a lot of great insights that for sure will actually resonate with a lot of people, I think, in terms of you hinted already a couple of the real key challenges ultimately in those surveys and those studies. What I wanted to share with you today, because I think everyone is, of course, anxious to hear about Kathy's story. I'm going to share quickly a couple of what we say best practice approaches, call it a approach that we've been building up, testing over the years when it comes to cash flow forecasting. And as you see on the screen, there are sort of 8 steps, and it all starts with understanding the cash flow drivers. Interestingly, this has nothing to do with data or technology. This is just simply understanding the cash flow drivers in the business. And the next part is understanding your working capital. Sounds, I would say, understanding the delays between the events in the business as well as and the cash impact it will create. Now, these are 2 abstract things, but they are basically quite important to do first before ever starting to think about a cash flow forecast. Now, in terms of the cash flow drivers, that's sort of call it the one axis of the equation. The other axis is the horizon. What are we trying to achieve? A short-term, mid-term, and long-term forecast. And when we go to step 4, it's time to fill, let's say, the sources. It's try to think about the sources of data that can actually serve each of these horizons. And as we know, these might be different. The short-term being typically fed by short-term AR, AP, receivables, payables data, but in longer term, we might be dependent on a P&L or some other inputs. Now, when we have conceptually thought that through, step 1 to step 4, then it's time to say, how do we integrate and consolidate the data flows from across the enterprise to go into that one box? And this is where technology can start to play a role, but we're also, as John was referring to, a lot of the challenges around the data itself can come in. There might be huge volumes. Maybe it's aggregated too much or too few. And on the other hand, what is the quality that we have actually inside the data set? Now, once we're past step 5, it's about understanding, what do I need to do with that data? If I have a data point, do I need to apply logic? Maybe I only get one part of the intercompanies and I need to mirror it on the other side. Maybe I get some perfect receivables data with an expected payment date, but we all know that it's going to be client dependent whenever they will pay. So you want to apply some logic, apply some learning, and apply that actually on top of the data. Now, when all of that is done, after 1 to 6, ultimately we do have a cash flow forecast. And this is the time where machine learning, AI, or call it basically some other algorithms, some call it automation in terms of the data manipulation, can actually come in to improve the accuracy of the forecast or improve the time to getting an actual forecast. And I think this is really a process where you can iterate, you'll improve each of the steps along the way. And as some of our clients say, ultimately, you can be building and you can be optimizing your cash flow forecast always from the very start to the very end. And I think on the next slide, this is where it's quite interesting. Everyone starts from a different basis. And I think when this is what we call our maturity model, we have prospects and clients that we talk to that have called very low maturity on the forecasting process. Sometimes it's because the business didn't need it or doesn't need it. And sometimes it's very high because it's a very highly automated process. It is actually required by the business, the nature of the business, or anything else that would influence the need for it. Now, if you go a little bit deeper, in fact, if you go from low to very high, you'll see an arrow that says increased data requirements. Again, referring to what John earlier said, in the beginning, when you set up a simple forecasting process, you need a bit less data, it's less formal, but the more you go to the right, the more you let the process be automated. Typically, it's because of the data, or it's you'll basically have a need for data to actually automate it. Now, low means formal forecasting process is not really existing. Medium means there is a forecasting process existing, but it's very manual, it's Excel based, and there's no real usage of the data from an ERP system. More high-level figures through uploads from the different regions, maybe a small extrapolation. When you go to high, this is where ERP data, AR and AP, really comes in, and where you can, see some first logic being implemented on the data. When it's going to very high, then this is where advanced techniques, AI, ML, would come in to actually further automate the forecasting process. If you go to the next slide, we all refer to as the first step, understanding your cash flow drivers. Well, this is an example of, call it the do-it-yourself retailer or a fashion retailer, trying to get a good view on the ins and outs. The ins being the green arrows, the outs being the red arrows. And without going into details, you can clearly see in just one page what are the main sources of cash and the main uses of cash. And this is highly, I would say, recommended, for any business trying to contemplate cash flow forecasting, because it will at least give you a full picture, because it has to be complete, of what are all the ins and the outs of the business. And the next slide, we're going to take that one step further, where we're going to mix and match different ins and outs with, as well, call it the data or the data sources which need to feed those. Just to give an example, when we talk about intercompany flows or intercompany funding between the parent and the different stores, we might need to tap into our TMS. When we look at the daily cash inflows that basically are resulting from customers in the store, we of course need to link it to a P&L forecast or a budget per store. Now, when we look at purchase invoices or purchase orders, of course, these can come from the ERP. So you can see here clearly the link between the drivers as well as the sources or the data sources that can actually be linked to the drivers, as well linked to the short-term, mid-term, long-term horizon that are actually depicted on the bottom of this slide. So if you go to the next slide, John. Now, when saying all this, just taking this practical example of a fashion retailer or do-it-yourself retailer, as John mentioned, it can be quite confronting to say, oh, but where am I in the process, and how do I even start? And this is why we developed what we call a sort of three-step approach: walk, run, fly, where it doesn't need to be very difficult to start building a cash flow forecast. Cash flow forecasts start always from an understanding of the actuals. We can get our forecast insight through a consolidation of different uploads or inputs from the different regions or from the different entities. And then we can slowly but slightly get more data sources, ERP information, algorithms to work in the next phases. Where in the first phase, limited IT resources, limited IT integration is really required, and then things can really be built up. Because as with every challenge, you try to lower the barrier for entry, you lower the barrier for really solving that challenge. Now going to the next slide. Of course, in the end, you'll have a picture that looks like this after the run phase, where you have on the actuals on the left-hand side, I would say a good view on the balances, good view on the transactions that go about to create your actuals. And on the right-hand side, you build up actually a forecast over time from short-term to long-term. And this is where elements from AR, AP, and as well the P&L can be collated together to form a, in this case, direct cash flow forecast. And of course, we cannot forget the white layers on the bottom, manual adjustments, zero balancing, treasury-related transactions. And I think this picture is really nice because it really shows you where you can combine the data sources for pretty much any general enterprise across the different horizons of the time. Now, finalizing, if you go to the next slide. Of course, you don't get to fill all the boxes at once. And I guess that's not the end goal either. The idea is to, again, build that over time. So you see walk, run, fly on the right-hand side from the bottom to the top in this case. And you'll see on the left-hand side how that picture of the different flows actually is building up over time. And that's actually the nice thing. You can layer your approach. You can layer the data sources on top of each other as part of your journey in cash flow forecasting. Now, talking about journey, I think it's a great time to pass the parole to Kathy.
Thanks, Nicolas. Yeah, cash flow forecasting is absolutely a journey for most companies in trying to find out just what their optimal solution would be. For Hitachi Vantara, just to give you kind of to level set the type of company that we are a very large multinational subsidiary for our parent based in Japan. They have very specific cash flow forecasting metrics, which we are required to provide to them on a monthly basis. And they're really driven, and with Hitachi Limited being a publicly traded company in Japan, I'm sure you can appreciate most of the metrics that we're looking at are quarterly based, quarterly and then into annual. So again, you know, as John and Nicolas have been sharing with you, really understanding what your forecasting requirements are is really that first step. What type of cash forecasting is it that you really need to work on? So I joined Hitachi Vantara about 8 years ago. At that time, the company was actually pretty cash rich, but we were going through a transformation and we were being very acquisitive. And so not a whole lot of focus had been put on cash forecasting for quite some time because it just didn't seem to be an issue. But understanding what we were up against, we worked very quickly to put a pretty solid direct, you know, and when I say direct, I mean bottoms up cash flow process. You can go back to the other slide, John, just real quick. I just wanted to kind of level set. We had a pretty good process in place, but again, it needed to continually be fine-tuned. So that kind of sets the groundwork for the journey that I'm going to share with you now. So I'll go through kind of what our current status was. I'll explain to you how we came up with the solution that we're moving forward with today, kind of go through some samples of what the platform actually looks like, and share with you, again, some of the business and justification arguments, for lack of better words, that were used to really sell this proposal to the executive management team. So go ahead, John. Next slide, please. You know, so as I mentioned, we had a pretty decent forecasting process in place. It was all Excel based. And then taking Excel worksheets, we uploaded them into Hyperion, which from my perspective is just Excel on steroids. But we were able to really consolidate. We were able to really do some low-level analytics, I would say, within Hyperion. And then in 2019, our FP&A folks came to us and said, we're going to get rid of Hyperion and we're moving to Anaplan. And we basically had no choice. So we were looking at Anaplan, trying to figure out how we fit our cash flow forecasting needs into Anaplan. I very early on realized this was not going to be a good fit. It was not the right tool for us. It was not going to give us the flexibility that we needed. So we actually started looking right then and there for a new tool. But in the meantime, we still had to move forward with Anaplan because our solution was going to be taken away from us, our existing solution. But it was a huge challenge. So we knew that we needed to look for a tool that was really going to allow us to have the flexibility for all the different types of reporting that we had been providing to our parent, and some of the new ones that were coming our way as well. Because in 2019, our parent introduced the fact that they were implementing a global TMS that all of the subsidiaries were going to be required to participate in. And that would include a whole different type of forecasting solution to support the global liquidity for the company. So we're now faced with a cash forecasting tool that was very limiting for us. And we were going to have to create a whole nother type of forecasting process to support what our parent was asking for the TMS. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, back in 2019, we started looking at various solutions. We looked at probably every TMS that was out there just to look at their cash forecasting capabilities. And I think it was 2019 where I actually met Nicolas. And we started a conversation. We spent at least the last 2 years now, just really getting to know the product, understand Cashforce, understand the company. And long story short, we realized this was the optimal solution for us. It was going to give us that flexibility that we need. It also would give us the ability to start integrating a lot of the data, not only from the banks, but eventually from our ERP environment. So you will end up with this incredibly comprehensive database for all of those inputs that you need from that are feeding into your cash forecast. The analytic capabilities alone, I think, were enough to kind of sell our executive management team. This was something that we had never had before. It's going to be giving us the visibility to, again, make better decisions. And that's really what it comes down to for me. If I have a way to take the data that indicates what we're doing as a company and put it in some type of a format that allows our executive team to make smarter and better decisions, I've done my job. And that's really what this particular project has actually now turned into. So not only are we going to have a better direct cash forecasting to meet our cash flow metrics that we need to provide for the company, we're also going to be able to provide the second format for the TMS forecasting that we need to require. And eventually, we will be able to provide a whole set of analytics for our executive team with respect to how we are managing cash as a company. So next slide, please. Now, we are taking a very modular approach to implementing this solution. And it really is kind of, as Nicolas said, it's walk, run, fly. You have to kind of use the tools you have in place today. We're not getting rid of how we are building the forecast. We're still very Excel based. We have I'd say over 70 entities that we have to forecast for. So when you need that level of granular data, Excel, it still really is the best solution for us to get that information. From there, then we will be consolidating into the Cashforce forecasting tool. And then once we're able to bring this information in, the next phase for us would be to bring in and integrate with our bank statements on a daily basis so that we can now bring in the actual information. And this is, in my mind, this is where the first step of analytics will be coming, because it gives us that next layer of visibility where you can start to do your forecast versus actual. How good are you at really forecasting? How good is that data that you're getting from the field? Where are our problem points? So this gives you that next layer to really go in and figure out, how do I further improve my forecasting capabilities? And then the third phase, once we kind of have that all underway, the third phase would be to really bring in all of your ERP environments so that you can actually start doing your working capital analytics. How are we managing cash? How do what is our DPO? What is our DIO? What is our DSO? Are we really balanced? Are we really, managing cash as effectively as we possibly can for the company? And again, these are, having this type of data, this level of data available to your executive team, this is a game changer, because again, I'm not sure, well, I would say for several decades, our company was very P&L focused. Everything was about revenue. Everything was about, what's happening, to that bottom line. But nobody was really looking at how can we use cash more effectively to potentially improve the P&L. There's that symbiotic relationship that has to happen between the P&L and the balance sheet. And I think that piece was missing. For me, I think the tool that we're developing here is really going to help bridge that gap very easily for us going forward. So next slide. Again, from a structure perspective, I think this is just a little bit about how the actual process that we use for forecasting today. We do have 3 different shared service centers. We have one in Krakow that supports most of our EMEA activity. They actually support some of the US activity as well for collections. We have a shared service center in India that supports the US and some of APAC. And then we have a shared service center in Kuala Lumpur that supports APAC as well. So we work very closely with these teams because they're the ones that are really close to the transactional information that we need to be able to build a really good bottoms-up forecast. So we have developed a process with them. We've developed a timeline. We have roles and responsibilities that everyone is aware of when their information is due. I think there's a graphic in here. It might be easier to look at the graphic. That might be the next slide, John. Oh, no, these are kind of out of order. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, this is basically the forecasting process that we have in place today. And the good thing is, and where this is really going to help us with Cashforce, a lot of this process is not going to change. There's not a lot of disruption that has to take place. We're going to be able to take the same tools that we use today and be able to migrate all of this work and activity directly into our Cashforce solution. So what I think will happen over time, I think this particular timeline will actually be shortened. And that's part of our objective as well, is if we can get closer to that consolidation point, which I think we will be able to, just because of the automation and the ease of consolidation that the Cashforce tool will give us. We can provide cash information real time to the executive team, probably closer to day 4 or day 5, as opposed to having to wait a whole week to get information out to the executive team today. So I think if you go back a couple slides, John, I think those were some of the screenshots from the tool itself. Again, we don't have a lot of data. We're about 65% down the path of implementation. But again, this just gives you an idea of what the tool would look like. I think the next slide just kind of gives you, again, a snapshot of how your variances would appear. Again, I can't impress upon you enough the ease of how this particular solution works. As an example, today, it takes us about 2 full working days to do a consolidation of all of our forecasts globally. We can do it within 2 to 3 minutes in this tool. So again, it's an improvement that's going to allow us to use this data. We can do analytics on the data first before we have to turn it over. Just the amount of improvement that this particular tool is going to give us, I'm really excited about. And when you add on the fact that once you've defined the rules for this tool, once you have used this tool over a period of time, the machine learning from the algorithms, the system and the tool will understand and be able to give you more predictive analytics as far as what the data is telling you. So very excited about that. So let's go next slide. Did that one. And I think the last 2 slides were really just kind of, again, emphasizing what we had been able to accomplish and where we really needed the help. And again, I think we had a really good forecasting process in place. We had a little bit of a hiccup when we had to transition to a tool that we didn't really endorse, but were forced to use. We made it work, but it still wasn't the right tool for us to support the cash forecasting needs for the company. So when we presented the opportunities on the next slide of where we could make those improvements, again, the fit for all of these potential opportunities with the Cashforce tool were spot on. And this is going to allow us to really bridge that gap between what we have today and where we really want to be in the future. So I hope that was helpful. I think that's all we have for now.
Great. Thank you. We actually had some questions that came in. Give me a minute. Let me flip over. Okay. Okay. So the first question, please. I have to make the font bigger so I can read this. Okay. What's a good first step for someone who is doing Excel-based forecasting today using historical averages and looking to improve the methodology? Thanks.
Well, who wants to take that? I think the only way, and I probably didn't touch on it as much as I should have, the only way to really take that next step is to start to understand your business. You need to get out and you need to start talking to people within the organization. Find out what are the areas that are really impacting cash and start there. And, look at your AR. That's your source of money coming in, for the most part. You really need to get a handle on that. So understand what your DSO is. What's driving your DSO? What are your payment terms, for your customers? Is it standardized, or is it all over the place? Is there something that you can maybe recommend to help, look at that area? Do the same thing with AP. What are your payment terms? So, start with the big ticket items, I guess I would say, and just really understand what's driving the changes in cash or your cash movement in and out of the company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I could probably add to that a bit too. So, I would totally agree with that. That suggestion as well as, moving from historical averages to something that's more based on actual AP, AR data, right? And understanding that cash conversion cycle really well, I think is critical first step in improving the forecast methodology. Because even for variance analysis, if you think about it, if you're off 1 week, you can't really determine the reason why the forecast is off. You just say, hey, this week was below average. So, there's not a lot more insight you can bring to it than that. But if you're building it based on actual financial data, you can say, okay, revenue's off, or DSO is up, or there's some sort of driver that's impacting cash flow. And that's critical. The understanding that gives you about the business, the inefficiencies maybe that are going on within the business even, or just something that needs to be tweaked in the forecasting methodology is definitely key. So
absolutely. Couldn't say it better, because the only thing that was going through my mind when I heard the question is that when you want to really get insights from the cash flow forecast, ultimately the insights come from understanding the business flows and then seeing something move right in front of your eyes. It will actually not come from taking up the averages. That will not give the actual insights into the business. It will actually be when you use real data from within the company, as John and Kathy described.
Thanks. We have one more question, so feel free, submit your questions now. Here is another one, please. What role is AI playing in the forecasting process today?
Maybe I'll quickly take that one. So remember when I looked at the 7-8 steps that form sort of the basis for a cash flow forecasting process? It was only the 7th step where I actually introduced the concept of AI, and I'm sure Kathy will follow me on that. Is that in the beginning you're all about understanding the business drivers, understanding the data around the company, the data sources. You're not busy with AI or machine learning at that point. You're really focused very much on the basics, on the very beginning. I think AI and machine learning can be very helpful when some of these basics are sort of behind, and when you can actually start to think, how can I automate the supply of the data? And I think just making it very concrete now, there are 2 use cases where I find AI and machine learning quite helpful in the light of cash flow forecasting. And they're as follows. So the first use case I would say is extrapolation of certain data flow, cash flows, or certain data that are actually very difficult to, I would say, forecast or predict in a different way. So you can just extrapolate. Now, again, as we said, like moving averages or averages, it just gives us let's say, it gives us the extrapolation. And the better thing is actually to then offset this with real data and what that would mean, because that would be interesting to understand what is the variance that we are creating versus that moving average. Now, these extrapolations, when we use AI and machine learning, they go a lot further than just moving average. They really are interpreting date-based inputs, and certainly with retailers, for example, that have a dependency on the date during the week, the date during the year, holiday seasons, etc. In that case, AI and machine learning is very helpful. The second use case is when you're interpreting customer payment behavior. As everyone knows, nobody pays on time, but ultimately there are factors that influence when customers pay. The invoice amount, the due date, the date itself, trying to understand, let's say, if there were earlier cases, claims by some of the customers on the goods or the services. All of these elements play into when a customer will actually pay. Now, when you get all these factors into a model, that's actually where AI ML can really help to predict better the actual payment date of a certain invoice. So I think it can be applied, but the basics have to be right first.
Yeah, I would agree. Because again, this is one thing that we're really looking forward to as we continue to build out this new tool. When you have your AR completely integrated into a tool that allows you to do analytics, and a tool that will, again, based on the rules that you have defined, be able to tell you what's happening without you having to go in and do massive amounts of calculations, which I have done in a former life to try to figure out how your customers are paying you. And it's real time. It's not static. You know, you can do it one time, but that's a very static exercise. This is a real life, real time, giving you, accurate data on how your customers are paying you. It helps you really pinpoint if you have issues, or what's happening well, what's happening maybe not so well, and where you need to focus your energy. So I do think that's one of the very first case, I guess, case studies, for lack of better words, that we're really looking forward to utilizing this tool for going forward.
Great. Thank you. Gosh, so much. Thank you. Okay, so I just took over sharing just some more updates that we're going to have. So just thank you again, TIS, and thank you, Kathy, for explaining your process and thoughts on how to approach an accurate cash forecasting solution. So just a note to the attendees, you can easily download the CTP confirmation on the attendance hub. Please don't forget to submit your survey results. And looking ahead, we have some really great events coming up with Team Annie. So on October 3rd, Team Annie is hosting a member-only networking lunch at WeWork location at 430 Park Ave. An invite will be sent out to you next week. On October 20th, we have a webinar, How Treasury Can Use Data to Drive Its Agenda. On November 17th, we have a webinar, What's Treasury's Next Big Thing, 2023 Technology and Innovation Predictions. On November 10th, Team Annie is hosting a social event at the Red Eye Grill in New York City. And on December 8th, we're going to have another webinar, 2023 Trends for Treasury Payments. So please register for these events on the Team Annie website. And as you can clearly tell, now is the time to become a Team Annie member. Membership is just $750 for a rolling 12 months. Membership includes all of our webinars and in-person meetings, social events, our TINS event that's going to be held in March, and our in-person New York Cash Exchange Conference in September of 2023. We also offer membership options to retirees, members in transition, students, and we have a 15% off group discount for organizations with 3 or more members. So to learn more about all of our upcoming events and membership benefits, please visit www.teamannie.org. So thanks again for your time today, and we hope to see you at a future event.